we actually had a customer, this is going back some time ago, that was actually leveraging us. He was running a combination. He did have some systems running within the infrastructure as a service and some servers running there, an application. But his application also has some components that was running in platform as a service offering. So what we were actually able to do is on the load balancer, there was one URL to access this application, this website, which means it was just one service on the load balancer. But we have this construct of having multiple sub-virtual services. So we're able to create multiple sub-virtual services under the virtual service, which allowed this customer to stitch together this application using some infrastructure as a service, some PaaS as a service as well. You can even extend this to include some Kubernetes as or AKS as an example, right?
Welcome, everyone. I'm here with Kurt Jung from Progress, and we are going to talk about load balancing, especially load balancing in the cloud and in Microsoft Azure. So, Kurt, thank you very much to have you in this podcast episode today. Can you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell me a little bit more what you're doing and where you come from.
Yeah, great to be here, Thomas. So I'm Kurt Jung. I've been with KEMP, which is now Progress, for about 11 years now. Time really does fly. Prior to KEMP, I was a consultant for many years, working primarily with Microsoft workloads, so doing Exchange migrations. First on-prem, back the days, and I've been around for a while. Exchange 5.5 and moving to Exchange 2003 and so on up the ladder, and then doing migrations to 365 for customers. Did a lot of Link and Skype for Business back in the day as well. And then I landed here at KEMP in about 2014 timeframe. And now, again, Progress Software is really primarily built on acquisitions, and they acquired KEMP at the end of 2021. And currently, I'm leading up the technical product marketing within our. We have a lot of products at Progress. So within our infrastructure portfolio, I work on doing product marketing in that area, which consists of really 4 products, which is What's Up Gold, Flowmon, Chef, and of course LoadMaster.
Interesting. So this is quite a journey. I didn't know that you actually have this past kind of similar. It reminds me a little bit I did similar work as an admin and consultant to do migrations and stuff, working with as you mentioned Exchange and things like that before actually moving to cloud. And then you also have all the expertise obviously in KEMP and load balancing, which you bring. So quite an interesting journey you have here.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been a great career so far. I got to touch a lot of different technologies, and which again always keeps things exciting. So yeah, it's great.
And it's always great. Also, I think most of the viewers of this are probably going to be very familiar with these parts and dealing with this situation where they have obviously on-prem workloads, they're doing the on-prem work, but then they also now faced obviously a lot with the cloud as well, and they bring those both worlds together is really, really interesting. I'm very familiar with KEMP, well, not very familiar, but I remember them especially from the on-prem world, where we needed load balancers and other things there. That's something you worked with as well, or did you just join the cloud world in that case?
No, I've worked with you talk about those the yellow boxes back in the day that you'd have in the server rack. No, I work on all the products. I mean, the nice thing about KEMP and LoadMaster is really platform agnostic, right? So whether you're working on a hardware appliance, whether you're working in a virtual environment, or whether you're working in the cloud, it's really the same product, right? So there really wasn't any distinction between cloud and on-prem for us at KEMP. We just all, just doing load balancing, and wherever that application needed to run, that's where the LoadMaster would sit, and that's the value we would bring to that application.
Awesome. So yeah, before we actually talk about a little bit about the solutions, which I'm very excited to learn about. So when we talk about load balancing, there's obviously like different kinds of things, right? In my mind, there's obviously, like as I said, the traditional load balancing we had on-prem from like VM to a certain other VM or IP addresses or whatnot, and then obviously we had the same thing in cloud. Maybe you can give us a little bit of like your view on this, on like load balancing in general, and how you look at this. Like, how should people think, especially people who might like still know it from the on-prem world, or like maybe some of them already like obviously from the cloud world as well. Like, how should people think about this kind of like way, and when would you use it for those people who haven't really done any load balancing work as well?
Yeah. I mean, a load balancer, right, is really, it's a network component or a device, right, whether virtual or hardware, as we mentioned, that's really part of the application stack, right? It distributes traffic across multiple servers, right, to ensure that the resources are really properly utilized, right? In the event a server goes offline, right, that could be scheduled or it could be unscheduled, right? Some kind of failure of some kind. We can have those connections be distributed to the remaining healthy servers, right? Keeping that uptime, the availability of the application. Um, you also have the ability, if you need more resources, right? The ability to scale out the application, add more servers on the back end, do that seamlessly, right? Without any kind of impact or, anyone knowing anything's happening, because it's all happening behind the load balancer, which provides, a ton of value, right? If you do have those, Cyber Monday, right? You need to have more resources to handle the traffic load that's coming in, as an example. But really nowadays, the load balancer, right? That term is really kind of translated into what's really called an application delivery controller, or an ADC, right? Since the technology has matured over the years, there's much more features, right, that help optimize the traffic, help secure the application, in addition to just load balancing connections, right? So when you're talking about, an ADC, you're about talking about availability, you're talking about scalability, you're talking about performance, and you're also talking about security, which are really all necessary, right, for these business critical applications that organizations are running today.
Okay, this is very interesting to me. Like, we especially, like, I mean, again, when we think in the old days, right, it was mostly, as you said, like kind of like availability, one thing to make sure that like one thing fails, that there's like other to pick this up, and then obviously the scaling part of it, right? That's kind of like how I was, or how we were thinking, especially in the like, I don't know, like a while back, about these different solutions. And now you bring interesting points there in with security, for example, as well. So there's some really interesting factors there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, security these days, right? It's not something that's really kind of second thought, right? Everyone is really thinking about security all the time. So, having security, and it's not, there's not one solution to help secure an environment, right? So you need to do layered security, and us sitting in, we always kind of say that the load balancer is in a privileged position, right, between the users accessing the application and the application itself. So there's a lot of different things we can do on the load balancer, um, again, to help bring more value to the organization. Again, security is one of them, to help secure that application, with some of the technology that's been out there.
Yeah, and you also mentioned something which I just tried to wrap my head around, is like the performance part, right? So there's also, obviously, I mean, you could say that performance just has, it's not just about scaling, right, to more machines, but also
Mhm.
maybe identify what would be the right point to actually send that user to, right? Depending on where the entry point is, and
Yep.
things like that. If you look at these like global like solutions there as well, I think that's like, I see a lot of use cases for this right now to make sure that happens too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as an example, right? You have the way that we call, called scheduling or distribution of traffic, right? And when the connection comes into the load balancer needs to make a decision on, where it's going to send that connection, where it's going to send that traffic. So there's a lot of different methods to do, right? So one, as an example, which ties very closely to performance, is sending it to the server that has the least amount of connections, right? So least connection scheduling. So we'll send it, if you have three servers on the back end, two of them have, 100 connections each, and then the third one has 70 connections, right? You'll send it to that third one, since it's not being utilized as much as the other two. So it's that kind of control of distribution of traffic that really helps with the performance in many cases.
Yeah, this is like, there's some super interesting things load balancers can do there actually, and so yeah, I know you guys are doing very smart things there to make sure that, like, in terms of security, performance, and all that stuff is taken care of. So obviously, like, one of the main talking points, and I mean, we have talked about this before, and that's also one of the things in the title, is like, okay, so in Azure, in the cloud, right? How do we operate there with load balancers? We obviously have a couple of different solutions there, which are native to Azure. Obviously, most of them with costs involved, some additional costs involved. And then, like, later on, I think I'm happy to talk about like what KEMP LoadMaster actually can do to improve this, like, and where it's actually a good fit. But like, so when you look at load balancing in the cloud, like, how is it like how should we what are kind of like the new challenges you saw when the cloud was happening, and like we needed to address this with like the load balancers scenarios and things like that?
Yeah. So when I started, like started in load balancing, or really always did load balancing when I was doing Exchange and things like that. But when I started at KEMP in 2014, obviously back then the Azure offerings weren't as mature, right? So back then you had the Azure load balancer, right, which is still, again, it's matured a bit over the years, but that's really kind of a more of the basic level load balancing that's available in Azure Layer 4. It can scale, right? Handles UDP traffic, TCP traffic, things like that. But it is more of a basic load balancer. And back in 2014, when I started, the application gateway, which is another offering in Azure as a load balancer, I think it was somewhere around that time frame. It was released, which provided Layer 7 load balancing, right? So adding some more advanced features later on. It added web application firewall for security, things like that. Some basic content switching, which again customers can leverage to send traffic to a certain set of systems based on information it can gather out of the HTTP request, right, within the HTTP header, as an example, like the path that the request is going to should go to a set of servers. A different path should go to these set of servers, and that kind of stuff. So that was just kind of starting to launch. So back in the day, positioning a third-party load balancer, it was just a little bit more of an easy sell. But again, as things evolved, the load balancing solutions in Azure, there's a few more offerings. Traffic Manager, right, which is more of a DNS solution, right? Distributing based on DNS requests, which is really kind of tied more to site resilience, right? Across different regions and things like that, directing connections to the closest location to that request, right? To minimize latency, right? Better performance and things like that. And then, of course, you have Azure Front Door, which is really kind of a combination. It's more advanced Layer 7 load balancer, does things like SSL offloading from a performance standpoint, right? Which is going to terminate that SSL or TLS connection at the load balancer, and then send that traffic to the backend servers unencrypted, right? Which will kind of offload that TLS overhead on those systems, right? To not have those systems have to do that kind of processing. So again, a lot of different offers, and again, they've been just maturing over the years since I've been around. A lot of changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, by like looking at these solutions and architecting some sort of solutions for like customers, right? There's always like, what do I actually need, and so on. There are multiple, obviously, solutions out there which like really are designed for different needs. And I like the approach where obviously we have all these, like, let's actually like more global like solutions like Front Door and Traffic Manager, but then also like having like these basic things where with like just a basic Azure load balancer, you can do very, very simple things, which in some cases you just need this, right? It's not like super advanced, but in some cases for like some like smaller stuff, you might just want to consider this as well. So yeah, there's a lot of like, definitely a lot of movement in that space as well. But obviously, again, with having all these like Azure solutions out there, there's definitely some space for like third parties out there, and that's something you guys obviously are addressing. So can you tell me a little bit more about like what are kind of like the offerings you have, and where you're basically jumping in to basically like add certain capabilities which are just not there?
Yeah, yeah. So as we were talking about, as these offerings, right, in Azure have matured. I mean, so is the applications, right, that they've evolved, right, over the years as well. So the requirements for these applications, again, there's some more advanced capabilities that are required. So we see a lot of, when we're looking at customers that are leveraging LoadMaster. Now, some of them, it simply isn't even so much about the capabilities, right? Some of them, they've been running KEMP LoadMaster on-prem, right, for many years. They are making a migration to the cloud. Maybe they're doing hybrid, maybe they're doing multi-cloud kind of models, and having that consistent load balancer that's running on-prem in Azure and maybe in other clouds. That's obviously provides a lot of benefit for the organization, right? Simplifies things, and we can get more maybe a little bit later on how we can kind of visualize the LoadMaster estate, right? And we have some solutions that we offer to help give better visibility into what's happening on the LoadMasters in your fleet. But from that standpoint, right, it just kind of simplifies things from managing the appliances, right? We very easy to use interface on LoadMaster. For those that want to do automation, right? We have obviously a API or a PowerShell module to do some automation on that. So really flexible, consumable LoadMaster. And sticking to kind of the simplifying things, we have things called application templates, right, which are designed for the applications that we support. And again, we're not limited to just the applications that we have application template for, but this will really kind of simplify the configuration on these appliances by uploading this template. We'll use Exchange as an example, since we mentioned that before. Now, not many customers are running Exchange in Azure. They're obviously going to go with 365. But as an example, Exchange, there's a lot of different settings that need to be made within the load balancer to really optimize that workload. So we have an application template that you can upload and use to set up the Exchange services. So it really simplifies things. You're getting things done, best practices, and it really helps with that. But going back to the how these applications are evolving, there's definitely some times where you need some more advanced capabilities, and certainly as an example around content switching, right? As I mentioned before, where you can send traffic based on information that you're gathering out of the HTTP header. So with LoadMaster, as an example, we have a lot of flexibility on how we can do content switching using regex, right? Regular expression, where you can build out these kind of ways to identify traffic in a very specific way, and then handle that traffic by directing it to a set of servers or a different set of servers, or even modifying the header, either adding, removing, or changing some of those attributes within the header because the application would require it. So just a lot of flexibility on these third-party load balancers that really provide a little bit more value in those Azure deployments that customers need.
Nice. Okay, so there's actually a couple of things you mentioned here, and one thing I wasn't aware of. I mean, kind of, but like not like fully. Is obviously the content switching part, right? So there is obviously like scenarios where, again, you brought one example. I think if you want to change headers and things like that, or where to redirect certain things. Can you give me like an example of like a real world example, like very simple to like understand, like when would you use this like content switching thing, like where, or have you seen that with like customers what they're like the fancy things they're doing with this.
Yeah, actually, I have an excellent example of that. So we do have a customer that actually is running in Azure. And now, obviously, what we've been talking about thus far is really load balancing servers, right, that are running within the infrastructure as a service offering, right, in Azure. We actually had a customer, this is going back some time ago, that was actually leveraging us. He was running a combination. He did have some systems running within the infrastructure as a service and some servers running there, an application. But his application also has some components that was running in the platform as a service offering. So what we were actually able to do is on the load balancer, there was one URL to access this application, this website, which means it was just one service on the load balancer. But we have this construct of having multiple sub-virtual services. So we're able to create multiple sub-virtual services under the virtual service, which allowed this customer to stitch together this application using some infrastructure as a service, some PaaS as a service as well. You can even extend this to include some Kubernetes as a right, AKS as an example, right? You can do that all within the LoadMaster, and depending on the request and where that request is going to, we can direct it to that service, all seamlessly, right? Using one URL, coming in to one IP address on the load balancer. So there's a lot of flexibility. And again, you just think about the load balancer as it pertains to infrastructure as a service, but there's other services in Azure that we also provide a lot of value to as well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So you could also like, I'm just thinking like potentially you could use this basically to say, okay, hey, I'm having this traditional application, and you correct me if I'm wrong, like, but like just my thinking of this is like one scenario could be I have this traditional application right now. It runs on VMs, infrastructure as a service, right? But then I create this, like I modernize the application side by side, running on PaaS services or Kubernetes, containerized. And then I could say basically based on the request, like where it's coming from, like, or which maybe user or whoever starts that request, where the request is coming from, I decide to like send it to a different, like to the new application, kind of the rewritten application, or send it off to like the existing one, right? Like if you say, okay, this is like could do some testing in that sense. Is that what this is about? Like, or
You certainly, yes, from that kind of migration, right? So you're not doing a hard cutover from a monolithic application to, as an example, microservices, right? Kubernetes application where you may be going to a more modernized approach for the application. You could do it in phases, right? And you can have that monolithic application running, a percentage of the application because there's some complexities with that part of the application, getting it over to a microservices architecture as an example. So you need to run in that kind of mixed mode, right, where you're running some monolithic and some whether it's Kubernetes or platform as a service offering. You could definitely do that and again slowly migrate that, take out that risk of doing that hard cutover and then find out there's problems. You could easily cut back to the monolithic application if that part of the application that you're migrating to is not operating or functioning properly or something like that. So yeah, 100%. That's a very valid use case, and we see that quite a bit.
Okay, yeah, that gives you quite some control over like what you want to do, what you want to test. Like there's like obviously that's a lot of things you can optimize there. Does this also, so you spoke about these application templates and you brought like Exchange as an example. Obviously in the cloud, as you mentioned, like you said, like there's not many people are running Exchange directly in Azure or something like that. But like now we spoke about these different architectures, like again, microservice-based architecture versus a more monolithic architecture. Is this like something too, or should I think about this more? Does that not really care like about these kind of things? It does more care about, is it like a web application or is it like something like that? Does it really matter what's behind it? Does it improve that as well, or does that not really matter?
Well, the thing with the application templates is, we do have a set of application templates. We have dozens of application templates based on different workloads and supported applications that we see very commonly utilizing the LoadMaster for. But you also have the ability to create your own application templates, right? So you can basically take a running configuration and you can export that out as an application template and then reuse that later on to deploy, if you're, again, migrating from on-prem to the cloud or something, you can capture that application template so you maintain those settings that you have within that application that you've been running. So the application template is very flexible in that way. So it doesn't really matter so much about what's running behind it. It's just the application template is tied very much to some best practices and settings for that particular workload. That's really kind of how those application templates work.
Okay, got it. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I was not familiar with those, but so they make a lot of sense. Like,
yeah, I mean, they're available from the KEMP Technologies website. You can download them, import them, and utilize them. And each template, depending on the workload that we're talking about, could have several different configuration settings, right? Which are you doing? As an example, we talked about before with SSL offloading, right, or TLS offloading. Maybe you want to do offloading. Maybe you want to do re-encrypt, right, because the application requires that end-to-end encryption due to security requirements and things like that. So each template has different options depending on a customer's unique requirements.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. No, understood. I think another very interesting point you brought up, and I think you just briefly mentioned it, is like in terms of automation. So I'm sure you have maybe some scenarios. Like I'm curious, like what have you seen out there customers doing with like the automation part you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of customers using our API and or PowerShell module to automate things. Like even we talked about before, scaling out, right? So we can automate to have a server. This obviously is not going to be a part of the KEMP module, but you can have a script that goes out, spins up a new server in Azure, and then using the KEMP API, add that server to the pool of servers that are available, right, automatically, right? So you're not doing anything manual anymore. You basically just, kind of launch the script. It goes out, spins up a new server in Azure, and then we can basically, with our API, add that server automatically to the pool to expand out the resources that be necessary, right? And that could be done completely, hands off based on different criteria. If so many connections happen, you could trigger that, right, as an action to take automatically, right, and completely automate the entire end-to-end configuration. So really powerful stuff.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. Like, yeah, also I can imagine like for migrations and all sorts of things wherever you want to do, like if you want to do something end to end, or just like even if it's not fully end to end, but like partially, like you can really automate these kind of things, and like probably also for DR scenarios and things like that where you need to build something around this. I think there's like a ton of great options out there.
Yeah, there's no yeah. There's no shortage of use cases when it comes around automation, for sure.
Yeah, and I love that you do a PowerShell module on this as well, right? Like usually, obviously, a lot of these things can be done using API calls, and that's obviously great. But like for a lot of, especially in the IT ops people, like it sometimes is just easier and more controllable in some cases to just have a PowerShell script which basically does the job, especially if you use it to do other things as well, right? So for example, you as you said, like you create new resources in Azure, you can use Azure PowerShell for that, and then you basically can use your PowerShell module to then also modify the load balancer and things like that. And then there's probably a couple of other things you can, where you actually can see like, hey, the value of PowerShell, bringing all this together in one place. And so I really love that, by the way. That's like why I need to highlight this. drastically.
Yeah, and I'm
always,
a big fan of PowerShell. You know, like you said, you just combine that all into a PS1 and you know, just launch the one script and it kind of does everything in one thing. We actually have we call it the Zero Trust Application Gateway offering, which is not anything. It's basically using PowerShell, a PowerShell script, a very large PowerShell script, which uses those content rules that we were talking about before, and sets them up in a very specific way. So you can create this policy, right? This zero trust policy, which you can actually set up some least privileged access to the application using a PowerShell script. So it's you know, again, downloadable from the KEMP website. You can you know, just basically there's a few different use cases that we've put together based on, you know, looking at the source IP address that the request is coming from, and based on that source IP address, maybe we're going to deny or permit access to a certain part of the application and things like that. So you can get very granular about providing that least privilege access just using PowerShell and some of the capabilities that are built right into the LoadMaster, and maybe not capabilities that you would think about from a security angle, but as you start putting them together in that specific way, you can provide some real interesting security use cases on LoadMaster using that. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, no, this sounds fantastic. Again, big fan of that, because again, like I know, like also, like I guess, like also the audience, right, for like people who are managing like networking and load balancing, those are not necessarily like developers, right? So writing an API call probably is a little bit like an overkill and hard to maintain and manage, versus writing actual like a script based code with PowerShell makes that tons of things easier. Something else I want to touch, and I think that's very exciting to me these days, especially, is like what you obviously said, and this also has to do a little bit with the history of like obviously where you're coming from with KEMP, is that you obviously have these physical local appliances, right? You have that, and then you're basically already probably in the customer premises, data centers, edge locations, whatever you want to call it. And then you also have obviously the same offering in the cloud. So you can actually go and have these hybrid cloud or multi-cloud scenarios where you basically bring this together. So you briefly touched and told me like that you have some visualization. Like I guess there's some sort of a management tooling which can help with that, right? So
yeah, so we have it's excuse me, it's called LoadMaster 360. And it's a SaaS offering, which we launched in at the end of 2023. And what it is a like I said, it's a visualization, a management platform, which gives you that visibility for your applications and the load balancers that are running within your fleet. So looking at the you know, the health of the application, looking at the health of the load balancers. We have added from a security standpoint, we have actually, we didn't even touch on this. I mean, we kind of referenced the web application firewall before, but we also have some pre-authentication capabilities on the LoadMaster itself. So what we can do is we can force users to authenticate on the load balancer before we send that traffic back to those real servers. So it's that another layer of security on the LoadMaster that we're providing for those customers that are securing those applications with, you know, requiring authentication. So with LoadMaster 360, you get a visualization on the pre-authentication. You know, who's authenticating when, and you know, who's been locked out. You know, looking at it like heat maps and things like that, of seeing when the authentications are occurring. Then we also have advanced WAF capabilities that we introduced last year, which gives really great visualization of what's happening from a WAF perspective on the LoadMasters that are running in your fleet. In addition to getting that visualization of seeing what rules are being triggered, what the sources are, what countries are the connections coming from, and things like that, we also have a smart rule tuner that's built into it, which allows you to create custom rules to reduce the amount of false positives that you may be getting, because you'll get false positives from time to time with any WAF solution, but this will help you build out those, with this rule tuner, build out those custom rules to prevent those false positives and making sure that those legitimate connections are getting through to the application. So, turning on a WAF is great to help you protect it, but not really understanding what's happening. That's kind of the missing piece, and LoadMaster 360 provides that level of visibility. In addition to getting those visualizations, we also have an incident center which will report on any problems that are happening with the load balancers or the application, and providing some context-rich information to help our customers troubleshoot that problem, so that they're not just saying, well, the server's offline. Maybe there was some kind of recent change on the LoadMaster which may have caused that, or something like that, right? So we're giving that kind of context-rich information to help customers resolve problems more rapidly.
Yeah,
yeah, and not to mention the UI, which is very modern and dark mode, and it's very, very cool. Got a lot of nice visualizations on top of it, which makes it even that much better.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I mean, I had to laugh because of the visualization thing, right? I mean, the why I had to laugh. Obviously, I love if it looks nice, but I think very more important point there is that it's not just about the nice looking. It's obviously because visualization really helps by identifying problems, right? To me, yep. I don't know, maybe it's the way my brain works, and maybe other people are always different, but looking at, for example, a large list of logs and getting that in my head and forming that into different places is much harder than if I actually have a nice visualization of what's happening in my environment, and I can see where is what happening. So I assume there's a lot, there's a lot of benefit to that as well.
Yeah, even as we started the conversation about just the distribution of traffic, right, and making sure that we're just distributing traffic properly. If you look into the application, you could look at the graph, which shows you how those connections for the application are being distributed. Are they even, or do you have one that's what we call lumpy load balancing, right, where you have one system that's getting a lot of connections and the other two aren't, for maybe a configuration, something that's not properly set or something like that, but getting that visualization to understand very quickly, wait, I'm expecting the traffic to be distributed evenly across these three back-end systems, as an example, and I'm not seeing that in this graph. I'm seeing that there's one that's really getting an excessive, many more connections than the other two. So that kind of stuff will really help customers to really understand what's happening from that standpoint.
Yeah. So I completely agree. Again, this is a perfect example. This is I'm a big advocate, especially when it comes to networking, to actually have proper visualization of things, because I know how difficult it can be to find actually certain things and see, hey, where is actually the problem? While, for example, the small example you just gave, right? It sounds like a small thing, but finding this in just values and data, I mean, you can find this, but with visualization, probably 10 times faster, if not more. And you can actually find even smallest kind of things you want to change.
Yeah.
Also, speak about this hybrid and multi-cloud thing. I think it's interesting because I thought this more of hey, this is great for existing KEMP customers, right? So if they have existing solutions, they would obviously say, okay, well, I'm going to use that in the cloud as well. But I see this now also as a very good option for people who are not or haven't used KEMP before on-prem, but they just use it for the cloud, and they start thinking about this, that they actually, with KEMP 360, can actually have a huge benefit as well to bring actually all that visualization together. So that also from that perspective, it can be very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, yeah, whether you're running in the cloud, whether you're running on-prem, you get that in even more benefit if you're running hybrid, right? If you're running hybrid, getting that all under one single pane of glass, right? That you can get to see what's happening across your entire fleet, right? And all the applications that are running. Some really great information to visualize, to to help understand what's happening, right, from the application standpoint. Because going back to that example where we're looking at the distribution of traffic, you could have, and we always use this as an example. Now, this is obviously more of an on-prem environment, but if someone on the firewall changes some kind of rule which nats all connections to one IP address, right? And you're doing some kind of a persistence, right? Which you're sending all traffic to the same backend server coming from the same IP address, and all connections look like they're coming from the same IP address, right? Well, what's going to happen? You're sending them all to one server. Now, with when the traffic is not, when there's low traffic, no one's going to know anything. But then all of a sudden you get hit with a lot of traffic, like in maybe Cyber Monday. Now that system can't handle all those connections, and it's just going to, fall, right? And then that's where you have a problem. But getting that visualization or getting that alert early on when that change happened, even though there's no real impact to the user at that time, at least you'll know that something occurred there, and you'll be able to react to it, rather than saying, well, that firewall change happened 3 months ago. How are we going to troubleshoot? How are we going to identify what's going on when you don't get that kind of insight? So yeah, I mean, a lot of benefits to getting that kind of insight for your application, to understand how it's working, and whether it's optimized or not.
Oh, awesome. I agree. So we talked about a lot of different things, and we obviously jumped through them pretty much a lot very quickly. Obviously, we could probably talk way more and much deeper into all these kind of things. But is there anything, like, from your perspective? I mean, we talked about KEMP Load Balancer, we talked about KEMP 360. Is there anything missing? Like, we talked about different capabilities. Is there anything missing which we really would have loved to mention? Or did we cover it more or less?
Well, I think we covered it more or less. I think we touched on a lot of things. I mean, even like a lot of folks may not be, for those that are familiar with KEMP, may not know that we support Kubernetes, right? We have a Kubernetes ingress capability on LoadMaster, which again, it can work with whether on-prem or in the cloud. Obviously, there's load balancing ingress. Now, the way that we're doing it with LoadMasters is a little bit different, right? It's not a containerized ingress controller, right? We're sitting outside of the cluster, the Kubernetes cluster, and working with the Kubernetes API. So a lot of unique use cases that could be used, like the one that we discussed before about that kind of migration from monolithic to Kubernetes. So that's one thing that I always feel like many folks that are familiar with LoadMaster may not know, right? Or may not understand that we do support that kind of environment as well. So they may be moving to that kind of more modern architecture and say, well, I need to find some other offering where they could actually still stick with KEMP, and we can even help them with that migration as well. So again, a lot of benefits that I think many organizations may just overlook because they're not familiar with the capabilities of LoadMaster. But no, I mean, in that LoadMaster 360, again, it's just a year, not even 2 years old yet, and we're still innovating there. There'll be configuration management where you can do all your configuration right from LoadMaster 360, right? At this point, you're doing that kind of management either through automation or with the UI today. But we're looking to add that configuration management on LoadMaster 360 to help you not only monitor your entire LoadMaster fleet, but also do configuration of it as well. So still more to come. So yeah, everyone should stay tuned to see where we take this, because I think I know it's gonna be fantastic when we get there.
No, yeah, it sounds like there's much more to come, and there's a good future out there. So Kurt, thank you very much for having you on this video. I learned a lot, and it was a super interesting discussion. For people who want to learn more now, especially about KEMP and Progress, where should they go?
Yeah, I mean, you can always go to progress.com, right? That's where you can, your starting point, where you kind of see a lot of the different solutions we have. Like I said, we have many solutions at Progress. So a lot of things that you may not know that Progress has. So that's a good starting point, or going directly to kemptechnologies.com if you're just really focused on the load balancing offering. But either place you can get access to. In addition, we offer trials of LoadMaster as well. So whether or not you even want to run that in your cloud, right? You can run a trial version for 30 days in your subscription, and or if you're running on-prem, you can get a virtual appliance to run in any of the major hypervisors in your on-premises environment as well, as a free trial. So for those that want to kind of kick the tires and just see what LoadMaster is about, that's one way to do it.
Awesome. And obviously, we'll put all the links in the description below this video. So thank you very much, Kurt, and thank you for everyone watching. See you in the next one.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, everyone.